In the farthest reaches of the galaxy, where light itself seemed to stretch thin, a lone starship drifted through the void. The Starhawk, a sleek and battle-worn vessel, cut through the silence with its glowing engines. Its captain, Ava Drake, sat alone on the bridge, her eyes scanning the endless darkness outside the viewport. She had been here before. This part of space, so desolate, yet familiar. It was a place that carried weight, the kind that hung on her shoulders like a phantom memory, pulling her closer to a mystery she couldn't ignore. Ava wasn't alone in her journey. In the crew quarters below, her team, each handpicked for this mission, rested, or pretended to. Tension had been rising ever since the message arrived from the Syndicate, a shadowy organization that operated behind the scenes of the galactic powers. They had given Ava a mission, one that, if she succeeded, could alter the fate of not just their galaxy but every reality beyond. The Nexus, a powerful alien artifact, had resurfaced. It was said to hold the key to interdimensional travel, a technology that could bend space-time and unravel the very fabric of the multiverse. Many believed the Nexus to be a myth, but Ava had seen too much, done too much, to dismiss it. She knew it was real. And if the Syndicate's information was correct, then whoever controlled the Nexus would have the power to reshape reality itself. She stood and paced the bridge, her mind drifting to the encrypted message that had arrived only hours earlier. The Syndicate had discovered the location of the Nexus. The coordinates led to Corvin 7, a barren, lifeless world on the edge of known space. It was an unremarkable planet on the surface, but the Syndicate believed it hid something far more valuable deep below its surface, a forgotten Nexus fragment, a piece of the whole artifact that had been lost in time. Ava had heard of Corvin 7 before. It was said to be cursed, a place where expeditions vanished without a trace, and no signals ever returned. The stories didn't frighten her, but they intrigued her. She had learned long ago that myths and legends often held kernels of truth, buried beneath layers of fear and superstition. But something about this mission gnawed at her. The Nexus was too important, too dangerous. If they found it, would they be able to contain its power? And, more importantly, could they trust the Syndicate with it? The doors to the bridge slid open with a soft hiss, and Commander Voss, her second-in-command, entered, his face drawn with concern. He was a hard-edged man, a soldier who had seen more wars than most, but even he seemed uneasy. "We're approaching Corvin 7, Captain," Voss said, his voice low. "Sensors are picking up some strange readings. It's unlike anything I've seen before." Ava nodded. She had expected as much. "Bring us into orbit, Voss. I want a full scan of the planet before we make any moves." Voss hesitated for a moment, then complied, leaving Ava alone once more. Her fingers drummed against the console, her eyes narrowing as the planet came into view on the screen. Corvin 7 looked as desolate as the stories described, a dusty, rock-strewn world with no atmosphere to speak of. But something beneath the surface shimmered faintly, a pulse of energy so faint that the ship's sensors could barely register it. Ava's instincts screamed at her. This was no ordinary energy signature. It was old, ancient, even. Whatever it was, it had been buried deep for centuries, waiting for someone to discover it. And now that someone was them, the Starhawk descended through the thin upper atmosphere, its hull shuddering slightly as it passed into Corvin 7's gravity well. The planet's surface was desolate, a cracked and barren wasteland that stretched for miles in every direction. Ava, Voss, and a small team of exploration specialists suited up, preparing for the trek into the unknown. Among them was Dr. Lasana Trent, an expert in alien technology, and Jax, the ship's chief engineer, who had a knack for getting into, and out of, impossible situations. As they disembarked onto the planet's surface, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. But there was no sign of life, not even the faintest hint of motion in the endless dust. The air was thin, the wind biting, and the ground beneath their feet crunched with every step as they made their way toward the energy source. It didn't take long before they found it, a massive chasm, wide and impossibly deep, cut through the surface of the planet. The readings spiked as they approached the edge, the energy signature coming from far below. Ava peered into the darkness, her helmet's light barely penetrating the black void. There was something down there. She was sure of it. Something that had been waiting, hidden from the galaxy for longer than anyone could remember. "Captain, we're picking up fluctuations in the energy readings," Lasana said, her voice tense. It's unstable. Whatever's down there, it's not dormant. It's active." Ava clenched her jaw. This was what they had come for. But now that they were here, she felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. The Nexus fragment, if it truly existed, was a piece of something far larger and more powerful than anyone could comprehend. But she also knew that there was no turning back. "Not now. We rappel down," she ordered, her voice steady. "Get the gear ready." One by one, they descended into the chasm, their lights flickering as they were swallowed by the dark. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to hum with energy, a low, thrumming pulse that vibrated through the rock. Ava could feel it in her bones, a deep, resonant frequency that seemed to call out to her, urging her forward. When they finally touched down on the cavern floor, they were met with an impossible sight. Carved into the stone was a massive doorway, covered in alien symbols that none of them had ever seen before. It pulsed with a faint, eerie light, as if the very air around it was alive with power. This isn't just a fragment," Lasana whispered, her eyes wide. "This is part of the Nexus core. The whole thing might be buried here." Before Ava could respond, the ground trembled beneath their feet, and the door began to shift. Slowly, it creaked open, revealing a dimly lit passageway beyond. The air inside was thick, heavy with a presence that was both ancient and alive. Ava motioned for the team to follow, but her mind raced with questions. Had they truly found what they were looking for, or was this something far more dangerous? The passage before them seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness, its walls humming with energy that made the air feel electric. Ava signaled the team forward, her heart pounding as they stepped into the unknown. The atmosphere inside the cavern was oppressive, thick with a presence that felt almost sentient, as if the very walls were watching their every move. The faint pulse of alien energy intensified with each step they took, and the deeper they ventured, the more Ava's instinct screamed at her to turn back. But she silenced the voice in her head. This was what they had come for, and there was no retreating now. As they moved deeper into the structure, the architecture shifted, becoming more intricate. The alien symbols on the walls began to glow softly, casting eerie shadows across the stone. The symbols were unlike any known language, their shapes fluid and almost organic, pulsing in time with the energy that seemed to flow through the entire place. Jax, always the pragmatic engineer, paused to inspect one of the glowing symbols. "This place, it's not just ancient tech. It's alive. Somehow, the energy here is keeping it running, like a system that's never been shut off." Ava didn't respond, her focus razor-sharp as they approached what looked like a large chamber ahead. The air grew colder, and the strange feeling of being watched intensified. As they stepped inside, they found themselves standing before a massive crystal-like structure that rose from the floor to the ceiling, its surface reflecting light in a way that seemed unnatural. Lasana's voice was barely a whisper as she stared up at it. "That's it. That has to be the Nexus fragment." Ava's gaze locked onto the crystal, her breath catching in her throat. The Nexus. They had found it. But as she took a step forward, the chamber shuddered violently, and the glowing symbols on the walls flared brighter, like warning signals. "Captain," Voss called out, his voice tense. "We've got movement." Before Ava could ask what he meant, a low, rumbling sound echoed through the chamber, and the walls began to shift. The ground trembled beneath their feet as parts of the floor started to rise, forming alien mechanisms that came to life as if activated by their presence. Ava's hand instinctively went to her sidearm, but something told her that weapons wouldn't be of much use here. Suddenly, the shadows in the room moved, coalescing into forms that weren't entirely solid. Dark, ethereal shapes materialized out of the air, surrounding the team. They hovered silently, their features indistinct, but there was no mistaking the malice in their presence. They weren't just entities, they were guardians, bound to protect the Nexus from anyone who dared approach it. "Stay sharp," Ava ordered, her voice calm but tense. "Don't engage unless we have to." The team stood frozen, weapons drawn but not firing. The shadowy figures didn't attack, but they seemed to study the intruders, their formless bodies swirling like smoke as they circled the chamber. Ava's eyes darted between them and the Nexus fragment, her mind racing. Why hadn't they attacked? What were they waiting for? Lysana's voice cut through the tense silence. "Captain, I think these entities are tied to the Nexus. They're reacting to its energy. If we disrupt it, they might—" Before she could finish, a loud crack split the air, and the crystal began to glow brighter and brighter until it was almost blinding. The ground beneath them shook violently, and the alien symbols on the walls started shifting again, this time rearranging themselves into a new pattern. Ava's heart raced as she realized what was happening. The Nexus wasn't just a passive artifact. It was activating. Suddenly, the shadows lunged, and all hell broke loose. The team opened fire, but their bullets passed right through the shadowy forms, leaving them unharmed. The entities retaliated, their formless limbs striking with deadly precision. One of the specialists, Mason, was caught off guard, and before anyone could react, he was enveloped in the shadow, his screams cut short as he disappeared completely. "Fall back," Ava shouted, firing uselessly into the entities as she tried to regroup the team. But the chamber itself seemed to conspire against them, the floor shifting beneath their feet, cutting off escape routes. The alien mechanisms continued to move, rearranging the room into a deadly maze. Jax's voice crackled through the comms. "Captain, we've got to shut this thing down. If the Nexus fully activates, we're done for." Ava's mind raced. They had come too far to fail now. She looked at the Nexus fragment, its glow intensifying by the second. There had to be a way to stop it, to deactivate the artifact before it tore them, and perhaps the galaxy, apart. But even as she searched for a solution, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing into something much larger, a plan that had been set in motion long before they arrived. With the shadows closing in and the chamber's mechanisms becoming more erratic, Ava made a split-second decision. She rushed toward the Nexus fragment, her hand outstretched, ignoring the chaos around her. As her fingers brushed against the crystal surface, a surge of energy coursed through her, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stop. She wasn't in the chamber anymore. She was elsewhere. The darkness around her lifted, revealing a vast, endless landscape of swirling energy and shifting dimensions. It was as if she had stepped outside of reality itself. In the distance, she could see fragments of different worlds, alternate realities colliding and merging, all tied to the Nexus. And in the center of it all stood a figure, tall, imposing, cloaked in shadows. Its eyes, if it had any, seemed to burn with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. It spoke, not in words, but in thoughts, its voice echoing in her mind. "You are too late, Ava Drake. The Nexus is beyond your control. Your reality and all others will soon belong to us." The vision faded, and Ava was back in the chamber, her heart pounding in her chest. The Nexus pulsed brighter, its energy rippling through the room. She stumbled back, her mind reeling. Whoever, or whatever, was behind the Nexus had plans far beyond what she or the Syndicate had anticipated. They were nothing more than pawns in a much larger game. The shadows surged forward again, and Ava snapped back into action. "Jax, Lysana, Voss, shut it down now." Jax sprinted toward the alien mechanisms, desperately trying to find a way to disable the device. Lysana worked furiously at the controls, her hands flying across the interface as she tried to decipher the alien language. Voss covered them, firing at the shadows in a vain attempt to buy time. But the Nexus was relentless. Its energy continued to build, and the ground beneath them began to crack, fissures of light spreading across the floor as reality itself started to warp. Ava could feel the pull, the overwhelming sense that they were standing on the edge of something catastrophic. She glanced at the Nexus fragment, its glow now blinding. There was no way to contain it. They had to destroy it. But as she raised her weapon, a voice echoed in her mind again, chilling her to the core. "Destroy the Nexus, and you will doom them all." For the first time, Doubt crept into Ava's mind. What if they were wrong? What if destroying the Nexus was exactly what their enemy wanted? She hesitated, her finger hovering over the trigger. And then the ground gave way beneath them, plunging them into the unknown. The sensation of falling was unlike anything Ava had ever experienced. The world around her dissolved into swirling darkness, but it wasn't just a void. It was as though she were tumbling through layers of existence, caught in the currents of time and space themselves. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to orient herself, grasping at the air. But there was nothing solid, nothing real. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the fall stopped. Ava hit solid ground hard, the impact jarring her senses. She gasped, her lungs burning. But when she looked up, the world around her had changed entirely. She wasn't in the Nexus chamber anymore. She wasn't sure she was even on the same planet. The air was thick and warm, filled with the hum of alien machinery. Strange, bioluminescent plants dotted the landscape, and overhead, a sky fractured with what looked like cracks in the fabric of reality itself. It was both beautiful and terrifying. Ava struggled to her feet, scanning the area for her team. Jax? Lasana? Voss? She called, but only silence answered. Her comms crackled, distorted, like they were out of range or out of sync with reality itself. She spun around, her heart sinking. They had been together only moments ago. What had happened? As her mind raced, she heard something behind her. A low, mechanical hum, followed by a soft, rhythmic clicking sound. Ava turned, hand on her weapon, ready to face whatever it was. Out of the shadows, a figure emerged. Tall, humanoid, but its form was fragmented, like pieces of it existed in one place, while others hovered just out of sync with time. Its face, if it could be called that, was smooth, featureless, but it pulsed with the same eerie light she had seen in the Nexus chamber. Ava held her breath as the figure approached. It didn't seem hostile, but something about it sent shivers down her spine. "You are not of this place," it said, its voice echoing inside her head rather than through any normal means of communication. "You have come from the broken reality." Ava's mind raced. "Who are you? What is this place?" she asked, stepping cautiously backward, keeping her weapon aimed but not firing. The figure tilted its head, almost as if it was curious. "This is the in-between, the realm that exists between what was and what will be. You are here because the Nexus brought you here. It is not finished with you yet." Ava's heart pounded. The Nexus. She had been right there when it had activated. Had it pulled her into some kind of alternate dimension? Or worse, had it somehow rewritten reality around her? "Where are my team?" she demanded, her voice sharper now. "Where are the others?" The figure stepped closer, its form flickering as it spoke. "They are lost, fractured like this place. But they are not gone. Not yet. Time does not flow here as it does where you come from. If you wish to find them, you must follow the echoes." Ava's mind struggled to process the words. Echoes? What does that mean? The figure raised an arm, pointing toward the horizon, where a faint light shimmered in the distance. "Follow the light. It will lead you to them. But beware, traveler. Not all echoes are what they seem. Some may help you, others will try to consume you." With that, the figure faded from view, leaving Ava alone once more in the strange, shifting landscape. She exhaled shakily, adrenaline coursing through her veins. This place, the in-between, whatever it was, felt dangerous, alive in ways she couldn't yet understand. But if the strange figure had been telling the truth, her team was still out there, scattered through this fractured reality. She had no choice but to follow the light and hope it led her to them. Ava started forward, moving carefully over the uneven terrain. The ground seemed to shift beneath her feet, sometimes soft like sand, sometimes hard and metallic, as if the rules of physics had loosened their grip here. The air around her vibrated with a low hum, like the distant sound of machinery or the heartbeat of the Nexus itself. Every step felt heavy, each movement carrying her deeper into this unsettling realm. As she approached the shimmering light on the horizon, Ava's thoughts raced. The Nexus had brought her here, but why? Was this some kind of test, or was it simply part of the weapon's power? warping reality and dragging her and her team into this place? And who had that figure been? A guardian of this realm? A warning? Suddenly, the light ahead flickered, then pulsed violently, and the air around her grew cold. Ava stopped in her tracks, instinctively reaching for her weapon. From the shimmering light, a shadowy figure emerged, this one more solid, more real than the first. And unlike the other, its form wasn't calm or ethereal. This one was twisted, distorted by rage and pain, its glowing eyes fixated on Ava. "Stop," she said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her mind. "I don't want to hurt you." But the figure didn't listen. It let out a low, guttural growl and lunged toward her with terrifying speed. Ava barely had time to react. She fired, the pulse of energy from her weapon hitting the figure squarely in the chest, but it passed through it like mist. The creature's growl turned into a roar, and it charged again. Ava dodged, rolling to the side as the shadowy figure swiped at her, its distorted limbs cutting through the air with impossible strength. She fired again, but the result was the same. It was like trying to fight a ghost. The creature's hand shot out, catching her in the chest, and the impact sent her flying backward, her body slamming into the ground. She gasped, the wind knocked out of her, but forced herself to her feet, refusing to give up. And then, just as the creature prepared to strike again, the air around them shimmered, and another figure appeared. This one familiar. "Jax!" Ava shouted, relief flooding through her as the engineer materialized, his form flickering slightly but unmistakable. "Ava, get down!" Jax yelled, holding up a strange device she had never seen before. It glowed with the same energy as the Nexus. Ava dropped to the ground as Jax activated the device, and a pulse of energy rippled outward, hitting the shadowy creature. This time, it reacted. The creature howled in pain, its form destabilizing, and with a final shriek, it dissolved into nothingness. Breathing heavily, Ava got to her feet, her heart racing. What the hell was that? Jax grinned, though his face was pale. "No idea, but I figured out how to hurt it." Before Ava could respond, the ground beneath them rumbled again, and she felt the unsettling pull of the Nexus's power growing stronger. Whatever was happening here, it was only the beginning. The rumbling intensified, and the ground beneath Ava and Jax cracked, revealing glowing veins of energy surging below the surface. Ava's mind raced. Whatever power the Nexus was unleashing, it was growing. The very fabric of this realm seemed to be coming apart. Jax, still gripping the strange device, looked around frantically. "This place is unstable, Ava. We can't stay here much longer." "I know," Ava replied, her voice steady but her heart pounding. "But Lasana and Voss, they're still out there. We need to find them before this whole place collapses." Jax nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "If this thing can hurt those shadow creatures, maybe it can lead us to the others. I think it's tuned to the same frequency as the Nexus energy. If they're caught in it, we might be able to track them." Ava glanced at the device in Jax's hand, realizing it might be their only hope. "Let's move, then. We don't have time." Together, they pressed forward, following the faint pulses of light that flickered across the sky like signals in the darkness. The air felt heavier with each step, the strange humming growing louder, almost as if the Nexus itself was alive and watching their every move. Ava could feel it. Something was changing, and whatever was about to happen wasn't going to be in their favor. They walked in silence for what felt like hours, though time in this twisted dimension seemed impossible to measure. The landscape around them continued to shift, the ground sometimes becoming transparent, revealing endless depths beneath them, filled with swirling energies and disjointed fragments of what looked like other worlds. Ava tried to ignore the gnawing feeling that these were echoes of destroyed realities, places that had been consumed by the Nexus or something even worse. Suddenly, the device in Jax's hand beeped loudly, and a glowing trail appeared before them, stretching into the distance. Ava's heart leaped. "That's them," Jax said, his voice filled with both hope and urgency. "Lasana and Voss, they're close." Without a word, they took off at a sprint, the trail of light guiding their way. But as they neared their destination, The air around them shifted again, and the familiar, sickening sensation of reality warping hit Ava like a wave. Her vision blurred, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to ripple like water. She stumbled, feeling the weight of the Nexus pressing down on her mind. "Ava!" Jack shouted, his voice distant, distorted. "Stay with me." She tried to focus, her muscles tensing as she pushed through the disorienting pull. And then, as quickly as it had started, the distortion passed, leaving them standing on the edge of what looked like a massive chasm. Floating above it, held within a swirling vortex of energy, were Lasana and Voss, unconscious but alive. Ava's breath caught in her throat. What is this?" Jax's face paled. "I think it's a rift, a tear in reality. The Nexus must have created it when it activated." Before Ava could respond, a deep, ominous voice echoed through the air, vibrating with power. "You should not have come here." Ava spun around, her weapon raised, but there was no one there. The voice, however, continued. "This place is not meant for you. You are outsiders. Intruders." Jax looked around frantically. "Who's there? Show yourself." The air in front of them shimmered, and out of the distortion, a figure stepped forward, tall, cloaked in shadow, but unmistakably humanoid. Its eyes glowed with the same eerie light as the Nexus energy, and its presence radiated a power that made the hair on the back of Ava's neck stand on end. "I am the keeper of the Nexus," the figure said, its voice low and resonant, as if it spoke from the very core of the fractured dimension. "You have tampered with forces beyond your understanding." Ava's grip tightened on her weapon, but she didn't fire. "We're here to stop the Nexus. It's tearing apart everything, realities, timelines, entire worlds. We can't let that happen." The Keeper's glowing eyes narrowed. "You speak of things you do not comprehend, human. The Nexus is not a weapon. It is a key to all that has been and all that will be." "A key?" Jax asked, his voice trembling slightly. "To what?" The Keeper turned its gaze toward the swirling vortex where Lasana and Voss were trapped. "To the truth of existence itself. The Nexus unlocks the doors between worlds, between realities. It has the power to reshape the very fabric of the universe." Ava's heart raced. "That's exactly why we have to stop it. If it falls into the wrong hands—" "You are the wrong hands," the Keeper interrupted, its voice filled with cold finality. "You and your kind seek to control that which cannot be controlled. The Nexus is beyond your reach. You have already set in motion events that cannot be undone." Before Ava could respond, the ground beneath them shook violently, and the vortex above the chasm began to pulse with greater intensity. Lasana and Voss's bodies shifted within the energy field, as though they were being pulled deeper into the rift. Ava's heart pounded. "We have to get them out of there." Jax looked at the device in his hand, his expression grim. "I don't know how. The energy, it's too unstable. If we disrupt it, it will destroy them," the Keeper said, finishing his sentence with chilling certainty. "Their fates are already sealed." "No," Ava shouted, stepping forward. "There has to be another way." The Keeper regarded her with a cold, emotionless gaze. "There is always another way, but it comes at a price." Ava froze, her mind racing. "What price?" The Keeper extended its hand, and in it, a small, glowing orb materialized, pulsing with the same energy as the Nexus. "Take this. It will allow you to unlock the full potential of the Nexus. With it, you can save your friends, or you can destroy the Nexus forever. But you cannot do both." Ava's breath caught in her throat. The weight of the decision crashed down on her like a tidal wave. She could feel Jax watching her, waiting for her to make the impossible choice. The ground beneath them trembled again, and the vortex above the chasm began to crackle with unstable energy. Time was running out. The Keeper's voice was soft but filled with immense power. "Choose wisely, human. For once the decision is made, there is no turning back." Ava's mind raced as she stared at the glowing orb in the Keeper's hand. The pulsing energy radiating from it matched the heartbeat thundering in her chest. One wrong move, and everything she had fought for, everything they had sacrificed, would be lost forever. Jax's voice pulled her back from the edge of panic. Ava, we can't trust him. The Nexus, it's dangerous. If we use it, who knows what could happen? But if we don't, his voice cracked as he glanced at the vortex, where Lysana and Voss remained trapped in a stasis that seemed to teeter on the brink of annihilation. Ava gripped her weapon, her knuckles turning white as her thoughts spun. The Keeper stood still, the orb in his hand glowing brighter with each passing second. Time was slipping away, and the weight of her decision felt unbearable. She couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this thing was, it wasn't telling her the full truth. But then again, had she ever truly understood the Nexus in the first place? Every step they had taken had only led to more questions, more mysteries. Could she really trust anyone here? Her eyes shifted from the Keeper to Jax, then back to Lysana and Voss. She thought of everything they had been through, the battles, the betrayals, the dangers they had faced. And now, after all this time, they were so close to something bigger than any of them had imagined. But at what cost? What happens if I destroy the Nexus? Ava asked, her voice barely a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the tension. The Keeper's glowing eyes flickered. The Nexus binds realities together. Destroying it will sever the connection between them. Some worlds will be lost. Others will survive, but altered, forever changed by the absence of the Nexus's influence. Jax let out a low breath, shaking his head. This is insane. We can't destroy the fabric of reality. But if we use it... The Keeper interjected, its tone ominous. Using the Nexus to rewrite reality comes at a cost. For every change made, there is an equal consequence in another dimension. You cannot alter the fate of one without affecting another. Ava felt the weight of the decision crushing her. Could she really play God with entire universes? Every choice seemed like a path toward destruction, but standing still meant letting her friends die, letting the galaxy continue down a road toward chaos. Her fingers trembled as they hovered near the orb. There has to be another way. The Keeper's expression remained impassive. There is no third option, human. Choose. A thunderous crack split the air, shaking the ground beneath them. The vortex over the chasm surged with power, sending arcs of wild energy streaking across the sky. Lysana and Voss's forms began to distort, their bodies flickering in and out of existence. We're out of time, Jax yelled, panic creeping into his voice. Ava's heart raced as she clenched her teeth, her mind spiraling. Could she live with the consequences of either decision? Could she sacrifice her friends, knowing there was a chance to save them, or doom countless realities by tampering with the Nexus? The Keeper took a step closer, its form towering over them. The Nexus is unstable. Soon, it will unravel everything. Make your choice now. Before Ava could react, another figure emerged from the shadows, a figure she hadn't expected to see. It was Lysana, or at least, a version of her. She stepped forward, her face calm but her eyes glowing with the same ethereal energy that filled the Nexus. Ava, listen to me. Ava's eyes widened in shock, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Lysana? How? I am not the Lysana you know, the figure said, her voice carrying an echo of power. I am a version of her, from a timeline that no longer exists. I've been watching, waiting for this moment. Ava stared, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. What are you talking about? How can you be here? The alternate Lysana smiled sadly. The Nexus is not just a key. It's a doorway, a bridge between infinite realities. Some of us who were lost to time can still exist within it, trapped in its web. I've been caught in this place, watching as the threads of reality come apart. Jax stood frozen, his face pale. This isn't real. It's very real, the alternate Lysana replied, turning to Ava with intensity. I came to warn you. Whatever choice you make here, the consequences will ripple far beyond what you can imagine. The Nexus has already started to fracture. If you destroy it, the balance between worlds will be shattered. But if you use it, the cost will be unimaginable. Ava's pulse quickened. Then what do? You have to find another way, the alternate Lysana said, her voice trembling. There is something deeper at play here. The Nexus isn't the true threat. It's a tool, but someone is manipulating it from the shadows, bending realities to their will. Ava's stomach dropped. Who? Before the alternate Lysana could answer, the ground shook violently, and the vortex above the chasm exploded with raw energy. Ava stumbled, trying to keep her footing as the world around her seemed to blur. The alternate Lysana's form flickered, her voice fading. There's more to this, Ava. You have to stop them. And just like that, she was gone, swallowed by the swirling energies of the Nexus. Ava gasped, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Someone was manipulating the Nexus from behind the scenes? Was that the true reason for all the chaos? She had no time to process it fully before the Keeper's voice cut through the turmoil. Your time is up, human. The orb in the Keeper's hand pulsed with blinding light, and Ava felt the Nexus's power surging all around her, pulling at the very fabric of her being. Everything was spinning out of control. Make your choice, the Keeper boomed, the power of the Nexus thrumming like a heartbeat. Ava's vision blurred as the weight of the universe seemed to press down on her. The world around her shifted, fractured, and time itself seemed to slow. The Nexus, the Keeper, the swirling vortex, all of it hung in a delicate, impossible balance. But somewhere, deep in her gut, Ava knew this wasn't the end. Ava's world became a kaleidoscope of shifting realities. The pulsing light of the Nexus throbbed around her, its energy rippling through space and time, threatening to tear everything apart. Every breath felt heavy, as though the weight of infinite choices pressed down on her chest. Jax reached for her, but his hand passed through the shimmering light, his voice a distant echo. Ava, don't do this alone. But Ava wasn't sure she had a choice. The Keeper loomed above her, its glowing eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her skin crawl. The Nexus orb still hovered in its hand, growing brighter with each second. The fractures in the air around them widened, and the distorted forms of Lysana and Voss in the vortex flickered dangerously, on the edge of obliteration. You cannot delay any longer, the Keeper intoned, its voice resonating like a distant storm. The Nexus demands resolution. Choose now. Ava's thoughts raced, her heart pounding in her ears. The words of the alternate Lysana, if that's who she really was, swirled in her mind. Someone, something, was manipulating the Nexus, bending realities to their will. But how? And more importantly, why? She looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling in the charged air. The power of the Nexus flowed around her like a storm she could barely control. The temptation to use it, to rewrite reality and save everyone, tugged at her. She could fix everything, erase the pain, undo the mistakes. But the cost was unimaginable. Ava gritted her teeth. There had to be another way, a third option, something beyond the impossible choice the Keeper had given her. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled again, this time harder, and cracks splintered across the rocky surface of the platform. Energy surged from the chasm, and the vortex above them raged, spewing tendrils of raw, chaotic power. Ava felt the pull of the Nexus intensify, as if it were reaching for her, demanding her decision. The Keeper's voice boomed. You cannot escape fate, human. The Nexus must be resolved. But Ava refused to accept that. She spun around to Jax, who stood just outside the growing sphere of Nexus energy. His eyes met hers, desperate and pleading. Jax, there's something more. The alternate Lysana. She said the Nexus is being manipulated. I can feel it. Someone's pulling the strings, and we've been playing right into their hands. Jax's face twisted in confusion and fear. Then who? Who could do that? Ava shook her head, her gaze sweeping the chaotic scene around them. The Keeper, the energy vortex, the flickering forms of Lysana and Voss. Everything was spiraling out of control, but something nagged at her, a clue just beyond her grasp. There was a pattern, a hidden force guiding the Nexus's instability, pushing her toward a choice that felt wrong on every level. And then it hit her. The Keeper. It had been there from the beginning, guiding them, nudging them toward the Nexus, always present, always demanding resolution. But it had never fully explained its role in all of this. Who or what was it really? Ava's breath caught in her throat as the pieces began to fall into place. The Keeper wasn't just a guardian of the Nexus. It was part of it, an extension of its power. And if someone was manipulating the Nexus, then the Keeper had to be involved. It had to be the key. You, Ava whispered, her eyes narrowing as she turned back to the towering figure. You're not just here to protect the Nexus. You're controlling it. The Keeper's glowing eyes flared, and the orb in its hand pulsed with a sudden, violent energy. You know nothing, human. Ava's heart raced, but she pressed on, feeling the truth unraveling before her. You've been steering us from the start, haven't you? Pushing me toward a choice, pretending it's my decision when all along, you've been shaping the outcome. You're the one manipulating the Nexus. The Keeper stepped forward, its form rippling with dark energy. I am bound to the Nexus. Its will is mine, and mine alone. But you cannot comprehend the forces at play here. Jax took a step back, his hand hovering over his weapon, but Ava held up a hand, stopping him. She wasn't ready to attack. Not yet. You've been lying to us this whole time, Ava said, her voice steady despite the storm swirling around them. Why? What's your real plan? For a moment, the Keeper was silent, its glowing eyes burning with an intensity that sent a chill down Ava's spine. Then, slowly, its voice rumbled through the air, lower, darker than before. The Nexus is the bridge between all realities. It is power beyond your understanding. I was created to protect that power, to ensure it is never misused. But the Nexus, it is alive. It hungers. It must feed on the energies of the multiverse to survive. Ava's stomach churned. You're feeding it, by destabilizing realities. The Keeper's form flickered, as if it were struggling to maintain its shape. The Nexus must continue. Without its energy, all realities will collapse into nothingness. I have kept it stable for millennia, but now, with your arrival, it grows stronger. Your interference has accelerated its hunger. I cannot control it any longer. Ava's pulse quickened as the truth hit her like a punch to the gut. The Keeper wasn't just protecting the Nexus. It had been feeding it, destabilizing realities to keep it alive. And now that she and her team had become entangled in its web, they were part of its feast. Jax's voice broke through the tension. Ava, what do we do? She stared at the Keeper, the weight of her choices pressing down on her like a vice. If the Nexus was alive, if it was feeding on the multiverse, then destroying it might be the only way to stop it. But if she destroyed it, the consequences could ripple across every reality, including her own. Ava clenched her fists, her mind spinning with the impossible choice before her. But she couldn't trust the Keeper. Not anymore. There had to be another way. Some way to sever the Nexus's influence without unraveling everything. Suddenly, the ground beneath them cracked again, and a surge of energy shot up from the chasm, sending a shockwave through the air. The vortex above roared louder, and Ava felt the Nexus's pull intensify, tugging at her, urging her to make her choice. But as the storm of energy raged around her, Ava caught a glimpse of something deep within the heart of the Nexus, hidden behind the swirling chaos. A shadow, a figure, something or someone was inside the Nexus, pulling the strings from within. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be? Could the real mastermind be hiding within the Nexus itself, controlling everything from the shadows? Ava's eyes narrowed as she made her decision. We're not done yet, she muttered, her grip tightening on her weapon. There's something inside the Nexus. Something we haven't seen. Jax looked at her, his face pale but determined. Then what are we waiting for? Ava turned to the Keeper, her voice cutting through the storm. You want us to choose? Fine. But we're not playing by your rules anymore. Before the Keeper could react, Ava lunged forward, diving straight toward the heart of the Nexus, its swirling energies enveloping her as the vortex consumed her entire world. And then, everything went black. Ava was plunged into an abyss of darkness, her body weightless as she tumbled through the void. There was no up or down, no time or space, only the suffocating, oppressive silence. For a moment, she feared she had made a fatal mistake. Perhaps the Nexus had swallowed her whole, erasing her from existence. But then, out of the endless black, A pulse of light flickered ahead. It was faint at first, like a distant star barely visible in the night sky, but it began to grow brighter, drawing Ava toward it. She reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing against something solid. She felt a strange, almost electric sensation rush through her body, and the darkness around her rippled, parting like mist. Suddenly, Ava found herself standing on a smooth, obsidian platform suspended in an infinite, swirling void of color and energy. Above her, the Nexus spiraled endlessly, a colossal, glowing orb radiating with unimaginable power. Its tendrils of energy reached out like fingers, stretching into the fabric of reality itself, bending and twisting it to its will. But there, in the heart of the Nexus, was something or someone, hovering within the swirling energy. A figure cloaked in shadow, its form indistinct, shifting with every pulse of the Nexus's energy. It was as if the very essence of the Nexus was alive, and the figure within was its heart, its mind, its puppet master. Ava's heart pounded as she stepped cautiously forward, her eyes locked on the figure. She could feel the raw power of the Nexus vibrating in the air around her, tugging at her mind, whispering to her, tempting her to surrender, to give in and wield its limitless potential. But she resisted, her thoughts clear and focused on the figure before her. "Who are you?" Ava demanded, her voice echoing in the strange, otherworldly space. "What are you?" The figure did not respond immediately. Instead, it seemed to shift, its form rippling with dark energy, as if contemplating her presence. Then, slowly, it turned to face her, and Ava felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "You are persistent." The figure's voice was low, almost mechanical, as if spoken through layers of distortion. "I did not expect you to make it this far." Ava stood her ground, though every instinct in her body told her to flee. There was something profoundly wrong about the figure, something beyond human understanding, but she knew she couldn't back down now. This was it. This was the entity that had been manipulating the Nexus from the shadows, guiding her, Voss, and everyone else like pawns on a cosmic chessboard. "You've been controlling the Nexus all along," Ava said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. "You're the one behind all of this, the keeper, the instability, the collapse of realities. Why? What do you want?" The figure's eyes, if they could be called that, glowed faintly from within the shadows. It took a step forward, its movements slow, deliberate. "I am not the Nexus," it said quietly. "I am but a fragment, a piece of a greater whole. The Nexus is beyond control, beyond comprehension. It is the engine of creation and destruction, the cycle of all things. And I have been tasked with maintaining that cycle." Ava frowned, her mind racing to understand. Tasked? By who? Who gave you the authority to play with people's lives, to destroy entire realities? The figure paused, its form flickering as if caught between worlds. "The Nexus does not obey the will of any single being. It is the embodiment of balance. My role is to ensure that balance is maintained, that the multiverse does not collapse under the weight of its own complexity." Ava took a step closer, her hand still gripping the hilt of her weapon, though she wasn't sure if it would even matter in this place. "So, you're just a caretaker? You've been destabilizing realities to keep the Nexus alive, feeding off their energy? That's why you've been manipulating us. But what about the Keeper? Was it your puppet too?" The figure's dark form seemed to ripple again, as if amused by the question. "The Keeper is a relic, a remnant of an ancient time. It serves its purpose, but it is blind to the larger game. You, Ava Drake, are different. You have glimpsed the truth, and now you stand at the edge of something far greater than yourself." Ava's eyes narrowed. "What truth?" The figure's voice lowered, almost a whisper. "The Nexus is not a tool for your petty desires. It is not a weapon to be wielded or a puzzle to be solved. It is the crucible of reality, and those who come too close are either consumed or reborn." The words hit Ava like a blow. "Reborn? What are you saying?" The figure raised a hand, and the energy around them swirled faster, crackling with power. "You are not the first to seek the Nexus, and you will not be the last. But unlike the others, You have touched the core of its essence. You have been shaped by it, changed by it. Ava's pulse quickened. Changed? She hadn't felt any different, but there was something she couldn't explain. Ever since she had first encountered the Nexus, she had felt a connection to it, something deep and inexplicable. But now, hearing it put into words, the realization hit her. That's why I can feel it, isn't it? That's why I can resist its pull. It's because I'm connected to it. The figure tilted its head, the shadows swirling around it like a cloak. You are more than connected. You are a part of the Nexus now. Its energy flows through you, as it does through me. We are bound to it, forever. Ava's mind reeled. Bound to the Nexus? What did that even mean? Was she becoming like the figure before her? A guardian, a puppet of the Nexus, trapped in its eternal cycle? No, she whispered, shaking her head. I won't let that happen. I won't be a slave to the Nexus. The figure seemed to smile, though its face remained obscured. You do not understand, Ava. There is no escape from the Nexus. You can either embrace it or be consumed by it. Ava's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing. She couldn't let this happen. She had come too far, fought too hard to let herself be consumed by the very thing she had sought to stop. But as the energy around her crackled and swirled, she felt something deep within her stir. A power, an ancient force that she hadn't realized was there until now. It was the Nexus's energy, but it was also hers. She could feel it, pulsing within her veins, waiting to be unleashed. For the first time, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to choose between being consumed or reborn. Maybe there was a third option. You're wrong, Ava said, her voice strong and defiant. I'm not like you. I'm not part of your cycle. The figure stepped forward, looming over her like a shadow of death. You are already lost, Ava. There is no turning back. But Ava refused to believe that. She closed her eyes, focusing on the power inside her, the energy that had been building ever since she first touched the Nexus. It was overwhelming, yes, but it was also hers. It didn't control her. She could control it. She took a deep breath and reached deep into herself, pulling at the strands of energy coursing through her body. The air around her hummed with power as she opened her eyes, and for the first time, she saw the Nexus for what it truly was, not a force of destruction, but a source of infinite possibility. And she would not be its puppet. The ground beneath her feet trembled as Ava unleashed the energy within her, sending a shockwave of power rippling through the space. The figure recoiled, its form flickering violently as the Nexus itself seemed to react to her defiance. You cannot, the figure started, but Ava cut it off, her voice ringing with newfound strength. I can and I will. The swirling energy around her exploded outward, engulfing the platform, the Nexus, and the figure in a blinding storm of light and power. Ava could feel the very fabric of reality bending and twisting around her, but she held firm, refusing to let the Nexus consume her. This time, she was in control. And then, in a flash of light, everything went still. The platform was gone. The swirling void of energy had vanished. Ava stood alone in a vast, empty space, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind reeling from the enormity of what had just happened. Had she destroyed the Nexus? Had she broken free? Or had she simply changed the game? But before she could even begin to process it, a voice echoed through the void, soft and distant. It is not over, Ava Drake. The Nexus is eternal. And so are you. Ava's breath caught in her throat. Ava stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as the voice echoed through the void. The energy around her had dissipated, but the ominous presence of the Nexus still lingered, a shadow looming just beyond the edges of her perception. She had unleashed her power, shattered the cycle, but the final words of the mysterious figure resonated in her mind like a curse. She wasn't free. Not yet. The silence was deafening. Ava felt the vast emptiness of the place, the stillness of space itself, but beneath it, something stirred. Something deeper, more ancient, and infinitely more dangerous than anything she had faced before. The Nexus wasn't just a relic, a tool. It was alive, and it had always been watching her. Suddenly, The void began to shift, reality twisting and reforming. Ava could see flickers of alternate dimensions, entire timelines collapsing and rebuilding in the blink of an eye. Worlds born and destroyed in an endless cycle. But amid the chaos, one image crystallized, a glimpse of herself, but different. This Ava was older, battle-hardened, with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of infinite realities. And she was still holding the Nexus. Ava staggered back, her breath caught in her throat. The Nexus hadn't been destroyed. It had evolved. And so had she. A tear in space opened before her, revealing an infinite number of versions of herself, all trapped in the Nexus's grasp, fighting their own battles, facing their own horrors. She could hear their whispers, their warnings. She hadn't ended the Nexus. She had only unleashed its true potential. And now, every version of Ava across the multiverse was tied to its fate. The path ahead was clear. The Nexus would return, stronger than ever, and its power would threaten not just one galaxy, but every reality in existence. And Ava Drake, in every timeline, would be its key. Ava clenched her fists, determination burning in her veins. She had one chance left, one final gamble to stop the Nexus for good. But the cost would be greater than anything she had ever imagined. The tear in reality grew larger, and Ava knew what she had to do. She took a deep breath, stepping into the unknown, fully aware that her fight wasn't over. It had only just begun.